Inside this edition of the Bills Pod, oh, Ed. That's my impression of Bev Bighead. She knows who Ed Bighead is. Do you? Do you even know who Ed Oliver is? I do, now, after doing this episode all about him. And so, shall I help you feel cheerier about the defensive interior of the Bills? Don't give me some, give me Oliver with a side of Ed Oliver, that guy on the Bills. Of the 10 projections and evaluations that I've stitched together for this 10 most important Buffalo Bills series, Ed Oliver's has proven the most challenging. I have Oliver as the 9th most important player on my list of 10 most important players. And as the script for this edition of the Bills Pod has coalesced, I've been besought with indecision as regards the narrative thread of my Ed Oliver examination. I think the reason might be that I, along with so many of my brethren and grethren in Bills Mafia, am a little confused about who, and what, for that matter, exactly we have in Ed Oliver. Is he a feast or famine style occasional game wrecker? Is his ability to produce dependent upon his matchup? Is he good, solid, a plus starter, a net negative, limited? ... The Ed Oliver evaluation took me some time, but I do believe, through watching a lot of film and sorting through a host of statistics, that I've answered the fundamental question as to what we, Bills fans, have in our starting 3-tech Ed Oliver, at least decently enough to be able to give you an episode worth your streaming, and to substantiate my confidence that Oliver is among the 10 most important Bills to the team's success in the upcoming season. In order to answer the question, who is Ed Oliver? And to support my position that he is important to this team, I've organized this segment into 3 brief chapters that each approach the topic from angles tethered to components of the Ed Oliver profile that I think are confusing. The first angle is that I don't think we Bills fans have a great idea of how Ed Oliver stacks up against the other defensive tackles in the league. Quite simply, is Ed Oliver good? Is he fine? Is he really good? Is he just okay? Is Ed Oliver in the Leonard Williams, DeForest Buckner tier of defensive tackle, or closer to the Zach Sealers, Osa Odighizuwas, and Grover Stewarts of the defensive interior world? The second angle is that I don't think we Bills fans have a great idea of how to square Ed's quote-unquote breakout 2023 with his seemingly disappointing 2024. After signing the 4-year, $68 million contract extension that made him the 13th highest paid defensive tackle in the league on an AAV basis at the time of signing, Ed had a monster season. The type of season that one would expect a talented player to have before inking a substantial contract extension. And so the bar of expectations was very high for Ed entering this past season, and statistically, anyhow, he didn't perform, or at least didn't produce, because they're distinct measurements, up to those expectations. So I understand and share the confusion of many Bills fans as to how to reconcile Ed's 2023 production against his 2024 production and set reasonable expectations for his 2025 production. But this is a podcast, and I'm its podcast host, so I'm going to try to alleviate some of that confusion over the course of this segment and this episode on the whole, all about why I think Ed Oliver is the 9th most important Buffalo Bill vis-a-vis the team's success in 2025. That's Chapter 2. Should we predicate our expectations for Ed Oliver's 2025 production upon his 2023 output or his 2024 output? The third angle, Chapter 3, is that I don't think we Bills fans have a great idea of what to think about the fact that Ed Oliver was selected 9th overall in the 2019 draft. Quinnen Williams was taken 6 spots ahead of Oliver. Dexter Lawrence was selected 4 picks after Oliver. Christian Wilkins drafted 8 picks after Oliver. And Jeffrey Simmons was picked 10 spots after Oliver. Who made the best pick of that bunch? The Jets, the Giants, the Dolphins, or us? So that's Chapter 3. But before I lay out any of those statistics that will describe any of those chapters, let me hit you with my elevator pitch on Ed Oliver. This is an elevator pitch developed not just from watching him, as I'm sure you've watched him over the past 5 seasons, but after watching a lot of tape with an eye towards being as unbiased as I can be in preparation specifically for this episode. Ed Oliver is consistently the first defensive lineman off the ball. I don't know if that resonates as something super important to you, but it's important tactically because a defensive tackle who presses the interior of the offensive line can really disrupt blocking assignments. And it's important as it describes Oliver's psychology as a football player as the sort to never take a snap off. And once he's firing off the line at the snap, he uses his low center of gravity and high-level explosiveness to his advantage in most matchups, and pursues ball carriers and quarterbacks with greater intensity and relentlessness than any other Buffalo Bill. Greater than Rousseau's, greater than Epenesa's or Daquan's. Maybe only Matt Milano resembles Ed Oliver with respect to a relentless pursuit of ball carriers, but, of course, Ed's overall size, that is, his lower than average weight and his shorter than average arms, require him to be properly schemed up in order to produce against the better interior linemen in the league. And it's this last feature of Oliver's game, the challenge he faces in matching up against the cream of the crop of interior offensive linemen, that has me all sorts of pumped up about TJ Sanders. An enthusiasm I've expressed now in several episodes within this 10 Most Important Bills series, and am again expressing. TJ Sanders' length and lateral explosiveness may just be what the doctor ordered to generate the small creases and momentary confusion between and among interior linemen to optimize Ed Oliver's unique up-the-field explosiveness against those very interior linemen who give Ed trouble in one-on-one situations. That's the elevator pitch. Remember, I'm Nick from New York. Elevator rides can take a while in New York. So, how's about we do some statistical stuff? I want to show my work. And people on Twitter love engaging with stats. And Daddy needs the engagement. Did you know that my handle on Twitter is @TheBillsPod? Hell of a handle, isn't it? How did I get @TheBillsPod in the year 2025? I'm like the 600th Buffalo Bills podcaster, yet I'm the one who winds up with @TheBillsPod. Big win for Daddy. Big win for Daddy.
Yeah,
hooray for Billy. Billy's number one. How about a little stat reading music there, Maestro? Remember I mentioned a couple minutes ago that Bills fans, I think anyway, have a tough time ranking Ed Oliver among his cohort on the interior of defenses league-wide? I think the following stats can help us do just that. That is, rank Ed against his peers. In 2023, that quote-unquote breakout year for Ed, PFF ranked him 34th overall among defensive tackles, giving him an overall defensive grade of 65.6. PFF thought Ed was a pretty lousy run defender and a pretty lousy tackler, but graded him as the 20th best pass rushing interior lineman with a pass rush grade of 77.3. That grade, 77.3, is a little suspect to me, a little wonky, a little low, if you ask me, because Oliver ranked 4th in total pressures with 72. Again, this is in 2023, the quote-unquote breakout year. And those 72 total pressures ranked only behind Chris Jones's 91, Aaron Donald's 87, and Nnamdi Madubuike's 78. And Ed Oliver's 11 sacks, which most platforms consider to have been 9.5 sacks, but since PFF doesn't calculate half sacks, Ed gets credit for 11, also ranked him 4th, only behind Madubuike's and Jones's 15 and Kobe Turner's 12. Maybe PFF really values QB hits because Oliver only had 9 in 2023, a number which ranked him tied for 19th, while Chris Jones led the league with 23. So a pretty wide gap between Jones at the top of the league in QB hits and Oliver at 19th. PFF's predilection for highly valuing QB hits notwithstanding, Ed Oliver's 2023 PRP score of 12.8 ranked him, rather unsurprisingly, 4th. A PRP score, by way of reminder from past editions of the Bills Pod, is a formula that combines sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times a player rushes the passer. So, basically, how frequently a defensive player generates a sack, a QB hit, or a hurry. PFF might have given Ed Oliver a pass rush grade of 77.3, making him 2023's 20th highest graded pass rushing interior lineman, but for all intents and purposes, or as my friend Ben might say, for olive intensive purposes, Ed Oliver was the league's 4th best pass rushing interior lineman in 2023. I use PFF's grades a lot on this show, but I don't always agree with them. I obviously don't really agree with Ed ranking 4th in PRP, 4th in sacks, 4th in pressures, and 20th as a pass rusher. The math isn't mathing, as they say. I think Ed was a top 5 interior pass rusher in 2023, and the eye test confirms that. We all remember Ed kicking total ass in 2023. So, what happened last year? What happened in 2024? Maestro, you can cut the music. Thank you, Maestro. I think it's important when we do a retrospective on Ed Oliver's 2024 output to keep in mind that Oliver missed 2 games, Week 5 against the Texans and Week 6 against the Jets, with a hamstring injury, and there are theories floating around the Bills mafia sphere that the injury may have lingered and negatively impacted Oliver's performance even once he returned. I can't say I saw obvious lingering effects when I went back and watched a whole bunch of tape, but I guess I can't say that I didn't see obvious lingering effects either. So maybe someday Ed will tell us, because I don't know. Anyway, Oliver's 2024 rankings per our dear friends at PFF. Oliver was 14th in total pressures in 2024 with 49, which shakes out to a pressure generated once every 9.65 pass rush snaps, as compared to his 2023 rate, which saw him generate a pressure once every 7.57 snaps, so a decline of about 28%. Not insignificant. In 2024, Oliver ranked 31st among interior linemen with just 3 sacks. And his 8.9 PRP score ranked him 19th, a pretty far cry from the 12.8 PRP score that ranked him 4th the year prior. In 2023, you could say Ed was a top 4 or 5 pass rushing defensive tackle. In 2024, you could not. In 2024, Ed, statistically, ranked somewhere between 14th and 31st. I, personally, like PRP scores as a decent way to set a barometer to a player's efficiency as a pass rusher, and so since Ed ranked 19th in PRP in 2024, how's about we call him a top 20 interior pass rusher in 2024? Sounds fair enough to me. Regarding how Ed Oliver measures up to the rest of the league as a run defender, ... In 2023, measured against other defensive tackles who played at least 200 run snaps, Ed Oliver's 9.6% missed tackle percentage ranked 41st. His 23 stops on run plays ranked 25th. His 1.5-yard average depth of tackle on run plays ranked 12th, and his 31 total tackles against the run ranked 22nd. In 2024, Ed Oliver's missed tackle percentage ballooned from 9.6% to 21.2%, which ranked him 75th. The 23 stops he recorded in 2023 fell to just 13 stops, obviously negatively impacted by having missed 2 games. His average depth of tackle in the run game actually decreased, a good thing of course, from 1.5 yards to 1.4 yards, which ranked him 6th. And his total tackles against the run, again, surely impacted by missing 2 games, fell from 31 to 17. To make a little bit more sense out of those stop and tackle metrics, they shake out to the following. In 2023, Oliver made a stop once every 12 run snaps and made a tackle in the run game once every 8.7 snaps. 12 and 8.7. In 2024, Oliver made a stop once every 19.5 run snaps and made a tackle in the run game once every 15 snaps. 19.5 and 15. 47% worse and 53% worse, respectively. As I sought some statistical context in order to figure out how much of Ed Oliver's decline in production was because Ed played badly, and how much of Oliver's decline in production was because other players played badly, or because Bobby Babich didn't scheme stuff up as well as Sean McDermott. Remember, McDermott was calling plays in 2023? Or because opponents attacked the Bills in ways that made it difficult for the Bills to play good defense, I might have kind of stumbled onto something. I'd legitimately, honestly, and seriously be interested to get your thoughts on what I'm about to say. So hit me up on Twitter if you either love or hate what I'm about to say. @TheBillsPod. Hell of a handle. What I've stumbled upon? What I think is really interesting and telling and paints a detailed picture of what the heck happened to our 2024 pass defense? Yeah, I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to make you wait until after this musical interlude. But before I send you into said musical interlude, I wanted to tell you a little something about said musical interlude. The musical interludes you hear here on the Bills pod, and also the intro/outro music you hear in each episode, are instrumental versions of songs off an upcoming album of mine. You see, before I was a Buffalo Bills content creator and father of an adorable and spirited little Bills fan, I was a drunk. An artist, a rock and roll singer, a songwriter, a performer, described by one entertainment lawyer for a major record label as, quote, the three Davids rolled into one, David Byrne, David Lee Roth, and David Bowie, end quote. Not a bad compliment. Woman, where is my compliment? I'm actually in two bands. One is like a real band. It's me and three other guys who are friends and collaborators, and that band is called The Motor Tom. We're putting out our 7th album soon, possibly before the end of the year. And I also have a solo thing, a musical act I call Cheery Red, Cheerryred. And Cheery Red is dropping an album called Radical Lifestyle Change over Labor Day weekend. Blast it during your cookout, Bills Mafia. One thing I can absolutely guarantee is that Radical Lifestyle Change, the upcoming album from Cheery Red, will be the best rock and roll album you have ever heard. I repeat, I guarantee that Radical Lifestyle Change by Cheery Red will be the best rock and roll album you've ever heard. And with that, here is your Here is what I dug up, which I think serves to explain a lot about the troubles our beloved Buffalo Bills pass defense faced in 2024. The Bills' PFF pass rush grade in 2023 was 76.4, and team coverage grade was 91.3. The Bills' PFF team pass rush grade in 2024 was 74.9, so only a point and a half off of their 2023 score. But their team coverage grade dropped from a 91.3, fourth in the league, to a, get this, 37.7. Only better than the Raiders. 31st in the league. I don't think you see such a precipitous decline year over year only because Rasul Douglas is a few months older, or only because Taron Johnson didn't perform well. I'm going to give you some stats that speak to Taron's significant 2024 struggles in a minute, though. Or only because Bobby Babich ran stunts 2% of the time instead of 9% of the time on passing downs. Or only because Daquan Jones got long in the tooth, but rather because all of those things happened to one extent or another, and because, and this is what I think I've stumbled upon, and I think it's really important, the other teams in the league, the Bills' opponents, have players and coaches too, and they seem to have done a very good job, more or less across the board, of identifying and targeting Buffalo's defensive weak spots. And that is what may have played the most significant role in sending a pass defense from top 5 in 2023, and never worse than 11th in the McDermott era, to 31st in 2024. Check this out. In 2023, Taron Johnson was targeted once every 8 coverage snaps. Terrell Bernard was targeted once every 8.8 coverage snaps. Dorian Williams was targeted once every 4.8 coverage snaps. Christian Benford was targeted once every 9 coverage snaps. Rasul Douglas was targeted once every 8.3 coverage snaps. There will be a test after the show. In 2024, Taron Johnson was targeted once every 6 coverage snaps, more frequently. Terrell Bernard was targeted once every 7 coverage snaps, more frequently. Dorian Williams was targeted once every 5 coverage snaps, about the same frequency. Christian Benford was targeted once every 10.5 coverage snaps, less frequently. Rasul Douglas was targeted once every 9.5 coverage snaps less frequently. When you put those stats together, what you see is a throw going to either Taron Johnson, Terrell Bernard, or Dorian Williams once every 7.8 coverage snaps in 2023 versus once every 6 snaps in 2024. That's a 26% increase in targets at the linebackers, if we feel like labeling Taron Johnson as a linebacker, which I kind of like doing because, well, that's essentially what a nickelback is. Again, from once every 7.8 snaps to once every 6 snaps, an increase in target frequency to linebackers and nickelbacks of 26% year over year. And while the linebackers are getting targeted 26% more frequently, the cornerbacks, Benford and Douglas, are getting targeted once every 10 snaps in 2024 versus once every 8.7 snaps in 2023, a 14% decrease in target share for the starting corners. The average depth of target on throws defended by Taron Johnson jumped from 4.3 in 2023 to 6.6 in 2024. And the average number of yards after catch gained per reception surrendered by Johnson jumped from 4.7 in 2023 to 6.6 in 2024, and that all equates to a leap in yards per reception surrendered by Taron Johnson of an average of 8.4 in 2023 to 11.3 in 2024. That's a 35% leap. That's not a jump, it's a leap. And not to totally pile on our boy Taron, but he surrendered 518 receiving yards in 19 games in 2023, and he surrendered 633 receiving yards in 15 games in 2024. For Terrell Bernard and Dorian Williams, the respective pictures aren't quite as stark, but they're pretty bleak nonetheless. For Bernard, his yards per reception surrendered rose from 10.5 to 11, and instead of being targeted once every 8 snaps, he was targeted once every 6 snaps from 2023 to 2024. Dorian Williams' averages actually improved year over year, but his sample size of 125 coverage snaps in 2023 is probably a little too small to be indicative, while the 323 coverage snaps he saw in 2024 included quarterbacks completing 76% of their passes when targeting him. And they targeted him once for every 5 times they threw the ball. How'd my boy Matt Milano fare in 2024? You guessed it. Not great. Milano played 150 coverage snaps, got targeted 15 times, and gave up 13 completions for an average of 12.8 yards per reception. Not great. Meanwhile, by way of reminder, our boundary corners, Benford and Douglas, saw their targets drop by 14%. So, opponents kind of got the Bills' number last year. Throw over the middle. Combine that approach with the Bills' defensive line ranking 25th in the league in average time to pressure, taking an average of 2.63 seconds to get heat on opposing quarterbacks, and you have a pretty damn good recipe for a defense that's consistently back on its heels. All the more reason for Ed Oliver to get schemed up right and take advantage of that scheming to generate faster pressures from the interior. Babich also must find a way to use the defensive scheme to disrupt quarterbacks' first reads, because the scheme seems to be kind of hanging our linebackers and our nickelback, who I think is really just a coverage linebacker, out to dry. I won't attest to being nearly knowledgeable enough to suggest what Babich ought to do, but what he ought not to do is allow opponents to so consistently target Taron Johnson, Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams, and Matt Milano. When you hear the stats I'm about to lay on you, you'll get a better understanding of how challenging it is to draw a line, a straight line, a squiggly line, a dashed line, a fine line, whatever, between how well a player tackles, statistically, from one year to the next, and what that means about his overall tackling ability. You're going to get a better understanding of the challenge of straight line drawing from stats to profile because... Can I get a little stat reading music here, Maestro? Here are Aaron Donald's missed tackle percentages, not just against the run, but on any play, per PFF, every year of his career. So, from his rookie year in 2014 through his final year in 2023. 12.8, 3.0, 4.2, 10, 17.5, 15.4, 12.4, 8.2, 7.8. A low of 3.0 and a high of 17.5 for who might be the greatest defensive tackle of all time. And all of the snap counts are comparable because Aaron Donald never really missed big chunks of time. Ed Oliver's year-over-year missed tackle percentages? 5.0, 13.6, 8.7, 5.9, 21.6, 17.1. A low of 5 and a high of 21.6. So, you see Aaron Donald? No, nobody is. But can we certifiably verify once and for all unequivocally label Ed Oliver a poor tackler? Absolutely not. He is somewhere in the perfectly fine to actually pretty darn good range. Thank you, Maestro. So, how's about we see if the stats and rankings and context we've laid out can clarify the three confusing items I offered at the top of this episode. How does Ed stack up against the other DTs in the league? As a pass rusher, he's somewhere between a top 4 and top 20 interior pass rusher. And as a run defender, the way I find most informative, most helpful to label him is to say that he's a good enough run defender to be a starter on just about any team in the league. That is, he's top 32. Would the Chiefs or Giants start Ed Oliver over Chris Jones or Dexter Lawrence? No, but most teams would be very happy to replace their current 3-tech with Ed Oliver. He's a bona fide, solid starter as a defensive tackle when viewed through the lens of run defense, and a bona fide, very good starter as a defensive tackle when viewed through the lens of pass rush. And when seen through the lens of McDermott's upfield one-gapping defensive scheme, Ed Oliver is a really, really good fit. As regards Chapter 2 and how we square Ed's quote-unquote breakout 2023 with his quote-unquote disappointing 2024, I do 3 things to express my thoughts about Ed's 2024. First, I shrug. Second, I recognize that his 2024 production wasn't that far away from his 2019, 2020, and 2021 and 2022 production. And finally, I watch Oliver's sack of Patrick Mahomes in Week 14 of the 2023 season on repeat. 3rd and 7. First quarter, 0-0. Ed lines up in the 5 technique on the left. Groot lines up in the 5 technique on the right. Vaughn and Leonard Floyd flank them in the wide 9. Groot runs a sort of stunt with Terrell Bernard, who feints a blitz from the second level that occupies the left guard's attention. Groot rushes the A-gap, just as Ed spikes the center, who has slid over to block Groot, while the right guard who's blocking Ed can't release he slides to pick up Groot, but doesn't get there fast enough, and so Ed and Rousseau combine to take down Mahomes and force a punt. You get all that? It's a lot of movement, a lot of lateral movement, and a really well schemed and executed stunt from Groot and Oliver, both lined up in the 5 technique, so pretty darn wide. It's an interesting alignment. As regards how I make sense of Ed's 2023 quote-unquote breakout season when set against the backdrop of his 5 other seasons as a professional that never saw him eclipse 3.5 sacks in a season, first, I shrug. Second, I recognize that baked into Ed Oliver's comparably outsized 2023 production was McDermott's aggressive defensive play calling approach, and a defensive line that included Leonard Floyd, who really made a big difference up until he ran out of gas. That, together, supported a defense that produced 10 more sacks in 2023 than any previous or subsequent Buffalo Bills team in the McDermott era. And then I watch Oliver's sack of Patrick Mahomes in Week 14 of the 2023 season on repeat. And finally, how do I feel about the fact that we drafted Ed 9th overall, thus declining to draft Dexter Lawrence, Christian Wilkins, Jeffrey Simmons, DK Metcalf? I feel great about it. Look back at that draft. It stunk. And the overall hit rate on any draft selection is close enough to a coin flip that we, as fans, really have to get more comfortable celebrating draft picks who turn into just good players. PFF put out an article last week in which they redrafted the 2013 draft. Of the 32 actual first-round selections in 2013, PFF found that only 10 of them were worthy of being selected in the first round with 12 years of hindsight. PFF also thought that 8 second-rounders, 8 third-rounders, 2 fourth-rounders, 2 fifth-rounders, 1 seventh-rounder, Jordan Boyer, and 1 undrafted free agent in Adam Thielen should have gone in the first round. We'll all likely be perfectly happy looking back on the 2019 draft from the year 2031 and seeing that the Bills took Ed Oliver top 10. To close this edition of the Bills pod, football is the best sport in the world, and it's not even close. The layers upon layers of context that exist within and around every statistic, and all of the complicating reasons that those statistics ever even make it onto the ledger don't exist in any other sport. And so, if Ed Oliver's production more closely resembles that from 2023 than that from 2024, it will likely speak more to the total roster construction, specifically the arrivals of Joey Bosa, Michael Hoyt, TJ Sanders, possibly even Landon Jackson, Larry Ogunjobi, and Deion Walker, and the growth of Greg Rousseau and Javon Solomon, and how that roster construction is schemed up. Looking at you, Bobby Babich, and coached up. Here's looking at you, Ryan Nielsen. Then it is likely to do with how Ed Oliver plays in a vacuum. I return to last year's AFC Championship game. Ed played well. You could say that he didn't make the big play in the big moment, but he kind of did. Patrick Mahomes fumbles the exchange to Pacheco late in the first quarter. Ed Oliver works around Jawan Taylor's down block and fires into the backfield to recover the ball. 10 plays later, James Cook is running off tackle for a touchdown to give us a 10-7 lead. Mahomes got his hands on the ball, and so if Ed doesn't get there quickly and bully Mahomes off the ball, the Chiefs would have a 3rd and 7 from the 28, and maybe they score a touchdown, and the entire game script is different. That was a big play. Overall, though, throughout the AFC Championship game, Ed got little to no help from Babich's defensive scheme and, by proxy, from his teammates. And so, if Ed Oliver's production more closely resembles that from 2023 than 2024 in 2025, it will be a reflection of a Buffalo Bills defense on the whole that had better personnel, was better coached, better prepared, and executed better than last year's edition. Wouldn't that be awesome? Tell me you agree next time you see me on the street wearing a Bills hat. Because I'm always wearing a Bills hat by raising a fist in the air and saying, "Go Bills." And I will return the friendly greeting by raising a fist of my very own and saying to you, "Go Bills, go Bills, go Bills, Bills, Bills!"